that was preparing Kenya for independence. That was the most powerful legislation in Kenya which controlled Africans, the generations of my grandfather. You are over 80.
They did not register how old you are.
Because they may not have the records. So when you are a kid, you took your hand across your head. And if your hand touched the opposite ear, then you are of age. You must, when you are paying your tax, you must also submit 12 tails of rats. The First World War experiences, Second World.
That's 24. Well, First World War is 24, 1924.
The First World War is 1914 to 1918. Yes, which my grandfather's group called it Vita vya Germany, the German War. Then the Second World War, 39 to 1945, which surprisingly the people, those old people used to call it Italian War.
Hello and welcome to this podcast series, Stories from Grandpa Sam. In this podcast series, we are privileged to have Dr. Samuel Obiero, an urban and regional planning lecturer from the University of Nairobi and a civil service member with a combined experience of close to 40 years experience working. But our exciting today and the reason for setting up this podcast is very different. We want to hear about stories that Grandpa Sam has lived through his lifetime. We want to understand some of his motivation, why he's decided to come up with these things. I have the benefit of listening to some of these stories, and I'll tell you, they're fascinating, they're exciting, they're very nice, and we can't wait to share them with some of them, our audience. So Grandpa Sam is very many things. He's, as you see, he's a doctor, of course, a doctor of papers. He's an accomplished author. He's very many things, but I think the things that stand out, he's a grandfather, correct?
Yeah, sure.
That's why you're grandpa, right?
Yeah.
Of course, I know that because he's my father-in-law. I should know that. Yeah. He's a father. He's an uncle. He's very many things. But I would love to understand. Obviously, you can see he's a grandpa, and we're in very different generations. But he's catching up. So you can imagine grandpa catching up all through the times. Those are the exciting things we'll be hearing. But Grandpa Sam, tell us about this exciting adventure you are embarking on to tell us your stories.
Thank you very much, Oscar.
Yeah.
As you have heard, my name is Dr. Samuel Obiero. Dr. Samuel Obiero, I was born during the colonial time, toward the end of the British administration in the 1950s. But my story, I'm going to say, I might bring in more stories which are before that time, as was told by my grandfather. And as I said, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a community elder. And I always like talking about my life experiences to the young people, to my grandchildren, and others about my perception of life through history. And that's what I will be talking in this series. What my experiences, what my perspectives, what I've gone through.
And just so to make it, Grandpa is a very exciting storyteller. I'm sure when his nerves calm down, because this is our introductory episode, we'll hear some of these exciting stories come out in ways that will wow all of us. So, but before we get into just, what to expect through this particular series. So I know for some of the stories and the timelines you're covering, you said you were born in the 50s. So of course you've lived through about more than 50 years of your own observed happenings and all that.
Sure.
But you also have told experiences previously by your grandfather, your fathers, and all those. Do we expect to get some of those understandings in your podcast?
Yeah, sure. As I've said, my grandfather, especially my grandfather, plus the others, they told me the coming of the railway to Kisumu. The coming of the railway, the First World War experiences, Second World.
That's 24. Well, First World War is 24, 1924.
The First World War is 1914 to 1918. Yes, which my grandfather's group called it Vita vya Germany, the German War.
German War.
Then the Second World War, 39 to to 1945, which surprisingly, the people, those old people used to call it Italian War. Yes.
And I
I'll explain
know,
later why that difference.
Yes. I was going to say that. Yeah. I know why we in Kenya, some of us call it the Italian War, and the Second World War, and the other one is called the German War.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's not what you think. It's not what you think. Yeah. So we look forward to it. Yes. But Grandpa Sam, very, very exciting just getting through these introductory sessions, but just help our listeners and viewers understand what are we going to expect in this series about your stories, about your experiences. What are we going to expect, considering we're going to cover almost 100 years?
Yeah, as I've told you, I will be speaking the stories as told, the historical stories, then my own experience. So that will be my childhood, my youth, my working experience. Yeah, I've worked here in Kenya. I've worked in other parts of East Africa, the countries. I've studied here in Kenya. I've studied in Europe. Those are the experiences I like telling my audience, my grandchildren, the young people, so that they have it on the record. And as they challenged me, they want these stories to be recorded or documented in history. Yeah, and this one is why this podcast comes in very easy. It's not necessarily historical, but it's historical experiences. Yes.
And you're going to be immortalized. Because whatever we're going to say here, it will forever permanently remain imprinted, not only to your grandchildren, who happen to be my children as well, but in other people as well.
And I will expect also people of my age, both ladies and gentlemen, to go through the same experience. I will be speaking my experience from Western Kenya and youths and my movement to urban areas, especially Nairobi. There are people who have those experiences from
other parts of the country,
Kenya, to the coast, Central, Eastern, Rift Valley.
It will be so fantastic.
Possibly we don't document this. The best way, there are so many Kenyans who are now bringing up their memoirs printed, but there is several media now, and this is one of them, where we can have it as documented.
There you have it, Grandpa. And if you thought he's old, you got it coming. So Grandpa, let's start it a bit slowly and figure out some of the early times. Most of us don't even know what colonialism is and what it was like. So you remember you were born, you said you lived through the tail end of this colonialism. What did it look like? You know, we just hear, we don't even think it existed.
So after asking that query, that question, I've wondered where do I start from? And let me first move a little, when I was a little older. Just before independence.
That's early 60s or late 50s?
1962 specifically. Because I heard there was a census in 1948. But now I'm speaking of the census of 1962. And that will give you a perspective of how colonial things were done. That census, I remember very well, waking up, my mother waking me up. I'm referring to my mother because during those colonial days, the ladies, the mothers used to remain in the villages. The husbands, if they went to work for job employment, as my father was a civil servant, they never went with their families. So he left us in the, that's an experience, the colonial experience. He left us at home with my mother.
In the rural home?
In the rural home. So I remember very early in the morning, the assistant chief arrived with the village elder plus another person whom I think was writing. So that must have been the census officer.
Was he white or black?
Black.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Those were primary school teachers, those equivalent type of people. So we were told, four of us, my mother, with my two siblings and myself, we came out and then they recorded it down. They could see my mother was female. They looked at me, I was male. They looked at my sister who was female. Then they looked at the other one, my last sibling, a brother. They recorded that and then they walked down. But that was the census of 1962.
So that was a colonial census?
That was a colonial census. That was preparing Kenya for independence. Yes.
I see.
So that gives you a perspective. That's one aspect, how record taking in colonial days. But depending on what you would like to prompt me to do, I can now go to other aspects.
No, we're just talking.
I moved ahead a little, but I
Yes.
can go down and now to start what
know,
it looked like.
You know, many of us read about these things and leading up to the 63 and all that. So, and I'm just wondering, where you were seated in rural Western, were there any stories, were there things happening you guys could hear, you could know these things about the colonialism happening and such kind of things?
Yeah. First, let us go back to colonial time. During colonial time, and this is what my grandfather and my uncles told me, you have heard of heart tax.
Yes, in India.
Heart tax in Kenya. So the British wanted to collect tax, and they wanted to know what method they will use. So they could come to any homestead and count the number of huts. And that was what they pegged on as tax for their poll tax. Yeah, so the richer the man, if he was a rich man with more wives, of course, that by proxy, that was a rich man. So he paid more tax than the guy who had just
one wife.
And of course, when your sons also put up their huts, that became a part of heart tax. So that is what was done. Then you are given a receipt. But during those days, it was only applying to men. You are supposed to have kipande, which today you call an ID. That was the kipande, that card for an able-bodied man. You were supposed to have that kipande.
Yes.
And so for a man to moving around in local areas during the days of my grandfather, you always had that kipande all the time. It's not like today they don't have pictures, but they not expect you to have a kipande, which the booklet, which was not yours. Then as a man to walk around, you also needed the code receipt. So the two documents for a man,
They must be together.
they must be together. So when you moved around, they will look at your ID, to the kipande, at your receipt, and of course they will ask your name. They will first take these documents, then ask what is your name, confirm you are the one.
But I'm assuming in those days we had so many names together, so many Obieros, so many Onyangos, so I could just use any other.
Yeah, it could sometimes if somebody was hard up and was not able to pay the poll tax, it means you cannot move. So you could still borrow. So that was catching these guys who are coming to cheat. They'll take this document, ask you what's your name, then you'll give
So I'll just say it.
You'll give a wrong name which is not in the receipt and which is not in the kipande.
But technically, if I had your kipande and your receipt, and I say your names correctly, they'll just allow me to pass.
To pass.
So who was enforcing some of these things? Were they the
those
colonial administration?
Those were done by, first, those days we had the chief. And remember that time it was the Chiefs Act. Even the Mzungu, district commissioner or Mzungu DO, they had no powers. They applied the Chiefs Act, which was repealed in by Constitution 2010.
Wait.
That was the most powerful legislation in Kenya, which controlled Africans, the generations of my grandfather.
So the chiefs were only changed in this 2010?
The act was changed in 2010.
Okay.
In 2010, when they did away with it. Yeah. Wow. It was amended along the way. But that was the basic provincial administration structure which was set by the Chiefs Act. Yes.
So the Chiefs continue.
Yeah. So that was the Chiefs Act. So it controlled the Africans. My grandfather will tell you that story. And if you reached of age, you have to get your kipande. And later, if there was the issue of going to look for employment when the cash economy was coming. Some of it was driven by the fact that you have to pay tax. And tax had to be paid, poll tax in the cash. So for some of the young people, in order not to deplete your your family assets by disposing of your cattle, which was considered very important. The young men used to go and work either in the Muzungu settler farms or in towns. Yes, and to require that, you required the ID, the kipande, and you also required the poll tax receipt.
So you could not get work if you don't have the poll tax?
You know, you could not get, you are not of age and so forth. And most of those documents, your age started from the moment you are registered for the kipande. That's why you always written you are over 18.
Wait, so they did not... Because they only registered you're over 18.
You're over 18.
They did not register how old you are.
Because you may not have the records. You may not have the records. So it is over 18. All the ID was over 18.
So they simply estimated, or when you become of age, your father or mother will tell you now he's over 18.
Yeah, and it was sometimes very interesting. Even a husband of 2 wives, when he was now venturing out of his village, and he was getting the ID, the kipande for the first time, they will still write him over 18.
So let me get...
And remember, on that kipande, like when I get my grandfather's kipande, my grandfather kipande, it was written there citizenship. He was not a Kenyan citizen.
What
he
do you
was
mean?
a British subject.
What do you mean?
His citizenship was British subject. And the ID, I saw it, was protectorate and colony and protectorate of Kenya.
So that means all the people who lived here were technically British citizens.
British subjects, not citizens.
Not citizens.
Subjects.
Subject, that means the Queen could order us to do whatever
yes,
you
they
wish.
are British subjects. Because if you are a British citizen, then you have the right of going to live in Britain. That would not allow you to go and live in Britain. You are a British subject. So, so Oscar, if I could go a little back.
Yes, please.
That was the setup of my grandfather. During the days when I was born at the beginning of the 50s, the economic system was around livestock and farming, crop farming, the millet, the sorghum, and cassava, and all that subsistence foods. And that's how we grew up as a small boy. You are trained in those arts as you move, as you grow up in life. We know it was very important about livestock because that was the store of wealth. That was the store of wealth. You could not do anything. You could not pay your debt. If you are a man, you could not pay dowry. If there was a problem, an incident, for example, where you required to pay fine, that was the store of wealth. The store of wealth was not the bank.
So it was either cattle, animals, and crops.
And crops. That was the wealth.
And so, did you experience any barter trading in your early years?
Most of the things was barter trading. I remember if you wanted to buy a cow, then you had to have 3 goats. And that will come 1 cow.
Yes.
Yes, and you could find if a family was hard up, he will appeal to his community. Then they will give him debt. He will borrow
Food.
No,
debt.
Of course, they could borrow food during the dry season, which you will pay later. But always you pay the cow. Then the other family will remember, you return that cow.
The cow.
The cow.
So now we borrowed the cow. You could either sell it, graze it, or
do something. Possibly you are fixed up that you have to go and make a function. Possibly, let us say, the most important thing is during a funeral, you don't have an appropriate animal to slaughter for the mourners, then your community will lend you.
Yes.
Yeah, the equivalent.
All right.
Yes.
So I know we are getting ahead of ourselves because we have so many stories to cover as we go along.
Yes.
But tell me, did you go to school? And how did you? Of course, you are a doctor, so you must have gone to school.
Yes.
How was that schooling experience?
Like me.
Yeah.
Let me be frank, my father was a police constable. As a police constable, when I reached the age, because they have the records.
How did you know you were of age to go to school?
Possibly, the standard way was when you are a kid, you took your hand across your head.
Eh.
And if your hand touches with the opposite ear,
Yes.
then you are of age.
Yes.
And still you had also records. Your father had records in the office. So, as a civil servant, not to give disrepute, because that will be against him. All the civil servants, whether they were messengers or what, their children must go to school.
Wow.
That was a condition. So, and of course the missionaries, if you are a person in the church or working for the missionaries, you must also go to school. So children from those two backgrounds had always the advantage that they has to go to school. So I went to school at the age of 7.5 years. And apparently I was the second youngest in my class at 7.5 years.
Yes.
So I went to school. When I went to school, I did not go through nursery school.
Straight to year 1, standard 1.
I went standard 1, and when I went to standard 1, I did not have access to a pen. And you sit down in the dust, and that is
You're writing
material. With a stick or your finger. If you get enough skills in standard 2, then you graduated to a slate.
A sled?
A slate. Possibly you young guys don't know what a slate is.
What is a sled or a slate?
A slate, S-L-A-T-E. A tablet.
Okay, like this one?
Yeah, like that one, but you used to write with a special pencil. And it was easier to rub. You can rub with water or the soft material. So if you graduate from there in standard 3, now you graduate to paper with a pencil. Then when you graduate, and you didn't move to the next class, to the next grade, until you have proficiency in these. That's why some people could keep on repeating for several years. But for me, apparently I was bright, I went year by year. Straight. Then when I reached standard 4, now you move to, now I graduate from a pencil to an ink pen.
Fountain pen.
Not a fountain pen. It was a stick with a nib.
Bamboo stick.
With a nib. And you dip that one in an ink well, which was on my desk, with a bolting paper, and you wrote. So after standard 4, then you start an examination.
The standard 4 exam. What was the name?
CE, Common Entrance Examination. Yeah, and that common entrance examination was for the Africans, it was for the Asians, and it was for the Europeans. Each group had their own examination differently because the education systems were different.
So what you were doing in class 4 is different from what an Indian and
what an Indian was doing. Indian Arab, those were put as one group. Yeah. And that process continued up to standard 8. That's why in standard 8, although my time now, when I was dealing with standard 8, we just got independence. Then the Kenya African, the KAPE, Kenya African Primary Education, the A stands for African.
That's the exam now.
Exam for standard 4, you had to pass it, and it was terminal. It was only those people who passed that examination.
Yes.
That now you continued from primary, standard 5 was known as intermediate. And intermediate schools were scarce in rural areas, very scarce and far apart. Remember, as a primary school kid, for me I was very lucky. I went to Obiero Primary School, which today is little over, just less than 3 miles. That time it was miles. To present, you can speak, it's almost 5 kilometers from my home to the school.
And that was, you were lucky. You're saying
I was lucky.
5
I was the
kilometers, you were
nearest
lucky.
because I was the other children were coming 10 miles.
To cross, to come to?
Crossing rivers, swamps, ridges, and valleys.
Did they have motorbikes?
There were no motorbikes during those days. There were no roads those days.
So they had to walk?
Because there were no vehicles in rural areas those days. Any vehicle was a government Land Rover. And I'll come back when you hear a Land Rover coming into your village.
What it meant.
What it meant.
Okay.
It's sometimes could mean trouble.
We'll get to there. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But somebody could walk 10 miles.
And this is how it came about.
Okay.
You went to your denomination.
Your religious denomination. Yes.
For me, I was a Catholic. So I went to Obiero Catholic Primary School. By that time, it was Milihili, the
Milihili fathers.
The Milihili fathers, because that time they had that influence when that part of Kenya moved from Uganda to Kenya. Religious ministry reported to Kampala.
That's 26.
We will revisit that. The movement was in 26.
Yes, we will revisit that another day.
The movement was in 1926.
Yes.
Then, because we had the Milihili fathers, of course, Central Kenya was a Consolata, and the coast was Holy Ghost. Holy Ghost. And see, I know very well I could meet other children.
Crisscrossing,
Anglican, going to their denomination and me going to mine. Yeah. And there are ridiculous cases. Kids could leave a denomination school which is in their own village.
And go across.
Wow. And the schools were few. There were not many.
Wow.
Like in the present day, Butula division, we had 14 primary schools. And we are speaking of an area lengthwise is 40 kilometers.
Wow.
Three Protestant and 11 Catholics. Yeah. Okay. And you have to keep to that because education that time was not government, was not national government.
It was missionary.
It was missionary until Kenyatta literally nationalized that system in 1964.
So what you're saying from the just the tail end of colonialism, or even through before we got to independence, missionaries were sort of the people who ran social services in the village.
Social services, education, health service, especially education and health.
They ran it. And they only got services if you are a member of their
denomination. That was that thing, you went to your denomination. Until the government, during that time, the government introduced, the colonial government introduced what they called DEB, District Education Board, schools, under the then native county councils, which can now take care of these other people who do not belong to this denomination. But basically, these ones, they were employed, even the teachers, even the education officers, the school inspectors, were the pastors.
Pastors and fathers and priests.
Yeah, those fathers and priests are the ones running that system. Yeah.
Wow.
And you could see them, and most of them were Wazungus. Yeah.
So I suppose not very many people went to school.
No, so many. You remember the schools were few, were far. There wasn't much incentives to go to school. There wasn't so much incentive for people who had kept out because they remained, they were not interested in religion, or they had not gone out to work, like the civil servants, where prison warders, police constables, county workers, and remember those were the opportunities for those people those days. The children did not have an incentive to go to school. Yeah, they did not have an incentive.
So we will get to a lot of more.
So that's standard 4, common entrance examination, and for me, for the first time, because when I was in class, anytime the teacher, even the test was written on the blackboard, then I would do the examination from the blackboard.
So everybody would do that?
Yeah. So we are meeting and printed the paper at the first examination, which was supposed to be a terminal examination, in standard 4. But the truth of the matter was, at standard 4, you could write a letter in your village, in your tribal dialect. You knew it. Because even that examination was still tribal. It was
in your mother tongue?
It was in the mother tongue. Apart from a little Kiswahili and a little and little English.
So thank you very much, Grandpa Sam. Clearly, we have so much we need to talk about, and I know in the coming conversations we'll be diving into more of all these things. But I just want you to circle back and help everybody understand. Why is this part of sharing your stories, your experiences, really important to not only to your grandchildren, as you said, and your family, but just to the general nation and then the people?
I will put it this way. When you look at European, North American, Asian communities, their children come from their history. The history makes them know what has happened. And even in this country, we are now stopping history as an important subject.
Yes, yeah. I know, yeah.
So what I'm saying is, my story, when we record it, plus other elders, when we record it, this is the history our future generation will understand. This is where we came from. When we are doing certain things, this is exactly where we came from.
This is the context. This is the follow through. Yeah.
That's why even when you come now to marriages, now everything is now changing. You'll find the elders are now coming with stories what used to happen in the past, and this is a part of that that importance. Where I'm coming from, it's good to have where our future,
where we came from,
our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and for prosperity, this is how we came from.
And Grandpa Sam, I think I was fortunate enough to have studied literature. I don't know whether these days they still teach it. There was something called oral literature.
Oral literature.
Which was a literature we were told was transmitted orally. So this is falling around those kind of vibes.
That's a part of what you can now call oral history, because the way the historian will record this, you will have to do scientific research, and we're not in that mode. So it is it's near what we can call oral literature, and that's where we came from, and this is where I grew up. Because my ancestors kept on telling me these stories, and fortunately for me, I was the type who could keep it in my memory. And it's just also important that I give it away. Give it to other generations.
And it's a very noble thing. I appreciate it very much. It helps us understand very many things. It's a fantastic thing you're doing, and I think I just wanted to conclude and close around it. Obviously, we know what is going on. This is being recorded in 2024 in the Republic of Kenya. I was just drawing parallelism to the hat tax. I just know about it happened in India, but I wasn't very familiar.
No, that was in Kenya,
as well as in Kenya.
Hat tax was here.
So it's like the hat tax, you are being charged for your own house.
No, hat tax, because the British administration, the colony had to cover its costs.
Yes.
So, and what was the basis of collecting revenue?
But they didn't build that house for you. That's what I'm saying.
They didn't build it,
but
it was used.
Yes.
It was used as
their colony.
It was used as a
proxy,
as the registry. Because like now, when you are working as an employee, your payroll, they put the payroll, pay income tax. NHIF.
Now it's called housing levy. So hat tax is very close to housing levy.
So it's not necessarily very close.
Yes.
But the British had to find a way. How are they going to collect that tax?
But I think it's
for those communities which were like those ones in Western, which had homesteads, I think that was the easiest way to administer that tax.
But I think it happens like housing levy, because you said the more huts you have, which means you had more wives, likely you are more wealthier, the more you'd pay. Housing levy is the same. The more you earn, the more you pay.
Of course. Or even leave alone wives. The more sons you had, who had the house known as Isimba. The more the Isimbas were in your home, which meant your home was an important. You are an important member of society. You paid more for it. Yes. And it was not only for tax, even for public health. I would like to say just possibly before we round up this episode, when there was plague at that period, according to my grandfather, in the 30s, when there was plagues because of a lot of rats, the British found out how do they control these as a part of sanitary public sanitation. So it was stated, decreed, every able-bodied African male or native, you must, when you are paying your tax, you must also submit 12 tails of rats.
Oh my goodness!
And of course, a rat.
Oh,
this is my
so
stories.
You have to kill rat.
This is the stories I have always been telling you.
Yeah.
And a rat, you cannot just harvest its tails and stand there. You must kill it.
Yeah.
And somehow they managed to reduce plague.
Oh my goodness!
As a part of that, yes.
But we didn't eat the rats, did you?
No, they are not meant for eating. But the idea was,
yes,
the more, if you have to bring 12 tails,
you reduce by 12 rats.
You have reduced by 12 rats.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Why cannot
and that accompany the poll tax.
I thought they'll give you an incentive. The
no,
more,
they
the
will
more
come to your home,
the less the poll tax.
They will record you.
Yes.
This your hat, this for hat.
And you brought 12 tails.
You bring 12 tails. If you can't, they put it in record that you
didn't bring 12.
You will bring 12.
So you owe the colony. If you brought 6, you owe 6 tails to the colony.
To the colony.
Yes, I think we'll have to wind up in this particular episode here. We have so much we're going to discuss. You can see.
So Oscar, you can see those stories.
Yes.
And you can see where this podcast is so important.
It is.
These are stories I like.
Yes.
And I've seen, you have been in those forums where I've talked to.
Yes.
To everybody, the young ones, not only the grandchildren, but even people of your age.
Yes.
And I feeling it's very important.
And all these stories are very, very relatable even to the current, as you said. If you don't know where you've come from, your history, your stories, you may not know or fail to see where we are going.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
So because people like Ogot and so forth, Gideon Were, when they brought the history, was narrower. But my stories here,
much broader.
It's exploring all the aspects.
And as we said, I
hope we have not talked about food. We have not talked about marriage. We have all those diseases.
There's so much. There's so much we'll cover. So as a listener, as a watcher, please stay tuned and please subscribe, and we'll be bringing you more and more juicy stories like of those 12 tales. Did you know you have to bring 12 tales? I don't even know. Anyway, we have so much we'll be covering, and I cannot thank Grandpa Sam very much enough. But that wraps up our first episode for Stories from Grandpa Sam. See you next, and thank you very much. And I'm being reminded, this episode is proudly brought to you by Pawa IT Solutions, the cloud solutions company provider for Africa. Thank you very much, our sponsors, and see you next week.
On the next episode on Stories from Grandpa Sam.
Chief in every location
had
a quarter of people to supply. To the British.
Watawambia mvua huu mtu.
Kangumu.
You are a man, you are supposed to be tough. It was an arranged marriage. This issue of love, nini, is a now modern thing. We have accepted it. Recently. There was the other alternative for marriage. Abduction.
This episode was brought to you by Pawa IT, powering your business through cloud technology. Special shout out to Black Sanduku Africa and Photomagic Studios for the production of this episode.